made sourdough before? Okay, one. Maybe you can teach the class.
I don't think so.
Just to be honest, we're fairly new, just a few months into our experience, but we've had really good success. This is a loaf that we made, and I guess that we can just share the testimony of how we learned. In our immigration, I would visit Sabrina, and we had to kind of jump back and forth the first few months of our marriage. And we had to quarantine actually in Canada. So we quarantined with a young man named Jonathan. He's from Poland, and I think he's 28. Anyways, he has a beautiful garden, very similar style garden to what we have. And he tries to do as much fresh food from his garden, and we felt really good while being there. 2 weeks was like, wow. We were just thriving. And he taught us this sourdough recipe. And as you saw on the invitation, the sourdough starter, you'll be able to take some home. We'll cover that more later. But it's like over 100 years. I think he even said it's like almost 200 years because it's passed down from generation to generation. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, so I just wanted to share that I was very, very intimidated at the thought of ever baking my own bread, just because it wasn't something that was done in my house growing up, and none of my friends that I knew did it either. But it's so strange because, bread has been such a staple part of the human diet for centuries. And I feel like it's just pretty recently that a lot of homes have gotten away from baking it themselves because it's available in the grocery stores, right? So I never really saw myself baking my own bread, let alone sourdough bread. So I was just really amazed when Jonathan taught us how easy it is. It's really not difficult at all. And so that was just really a blessing to me. And also, at the time when we first met Jonathan, I was avoiding gluten completely. I had cut all wheat products out of my diet for at least 2 or 3 years at that point. And but when we were at his house, he had just freshly baked a loaf of bread, and it smelled and looked so good. I was like, I don't care, I'm just gonna splurge and try some. And I found that as I continued enjoying his bread, that I digested it completely fine. And so I think there's a couple factors involved there. He uses only organic wheat. And I've discovered since then that a big part of the digestive problems I was having was from the pesticides used on the food, not on the food items themselves.
Specifically, Roundup, glyphosate, which they spray on the wheat crops. It's tragic.
Wheat especially is sprayed like several times before harvesting, and one of the times is immediately before harvesting. So I personally think that's a big reason why there seems to be such a huge problem with gluten. Everyone's becoming gluten intolerant. I think a lot of the people might just actually be allergic to the pesticides.
They've actually shown studies of that.
Yeah. So that was the case for me. So I found out that as long as I eat organic wheat, I'm completely fine. But also sourdough can also be much more easily digestible for people that do have gluten intolerance, because the sourdough itself starts to actually break down the gluten molecules before you eat it. So so even someone that does have gluten intolerance, which a few of the people at our ministry here try to stay away from gluten, but they might be able to digest the sourdough okay. So.
Yes. And sourdough is a living organism. It's a bacteria that grows and it breaks down. Sister, where are you from?
Japan.
Japan. So in Japan, they eat a lot of rice and noodles, right? Yeah. I love rice and noodles. So if Jesus walked in Japan, he probably would have said, in Matthew chapter 4, he says, man does not live on bread alone. But if he was in Japan, he'd probably say rice alone. But bread was a staple for the Hebrew people. So he says, man does not live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And so that is really encouraging for us. And so if you have a Bible in your house and you never open it, never read it, it's the same as taking this starter home with you and letting it spoil in your fridge and never using it, never baking bread, because you actually have to eat the bread to get nourishment from it. And we see that parallel with bread, because you actually have to eat the bread, and the same with the Word of God. You have to open the Word, you have to consume it and meditate on it. And so that's just a really cool object lesson for us that we like to share while we bake bread. All right, well, we'll get started, and she's going to weigh our flour out.
Yes, so we use all-purpose flour. This is organic as well. We do have a kitchen scale, which we use, and some of you might. If you don't have one, we also included the cups, conversion, but we go by ounces. So you just turn that on, and then you want to, just make sure it's zeroed with the bowl. And then we are going to do 18 ounces of the all-purpose flour.
Is this the same recipe that Jonathan gave you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very similar. He doesn't use spelt. He uses like a hard red, whole wheat. So he uses like all-purpose, 18 ounces of all-purpose, and then 14 ounces of like just whole hard. And he actually has a Wonder Mill, so he grinds it himself. It's always better to grind your wheat yourself if you can. It's really nice that way.
Okay, so we get that to say, let's see, 1 pound, 2 ounces, which is 18 ounces. And then we add the spelt. So like I think Malcolm just said, you can use any type of whole grain flour that you like. We like spelt, so that's what we use. And you're going to have 2 pounds of flour in total. And then you are just going to add 2.5 teaspoons of salt. So we like to use the Himalaya salt.
After she adds the salt, we'll cover some of our little utensils here. This is called a Danish dough whisk. It is pretty sturdy because you'll see why we're going to be mixing the dough with this. So you need something really strong. This is just a dough scraper. And by the way, it takes about 16 hours. You want to usually prepare your dough. What we're doing now, the night before, and then the next day you'll be baking. So we're cramming 16 hours into an hour. So bear with us. Yeah. So you'll see how we use these different tools, and it'll make sense to you. So this is Danish dough whisk. Something would be helpful because you're not going to be able to stir this stuff with a regular whisk at home. However, some of you may have like a KitchenAid, mixer yourself. So you're going to whisk those up?
Yeah, so I'm just going to mix this very thoroughly together.
To prepare the starter, you obviously want to combine the wet ingredients separate at first. This is my starter. This is the jar Jonathan gave us when we came down last. And so I'm going to be adding 2.5 cups to this bowl. I only have 2 cups here because it's a 2-cup, so I'll have to refill. In total, it'll be about 3, but we're going to start with 2.5 and then slowly add until we get our right texture. Thank you.
Malcolm, do you recommend, like, as far as the water that you're using, should it?
Yes, a good question. Purified water as clean as possible. We have a reverse osmosis.
The chemicals that are in the city water can affect the rising of the bread.
That's true.
Because they might inhibit the bacteria.
What about spring water?
Yeah, that'll work.
Yes, any filtered water basically is what you want.
Right. And so I'm going to add approximately a 1/2 cup of starter. I'm going to stir it first with this guy here. You see I'm using wood, we're using glass, obviously stainless, but we really want to keep glass and wood with the starter. There's kind of some controversy online. People are saying, well, even stainless steel is kind of not so good for basically the bacteria. It can kind of damage it because metal has little ions. Especially they said aluminum, don't use cheap metal. Use stainless. If you're gonna use metal, use stainless. So anything to say?
Just the metal ions can react with the acid that the sourdough produces. Most people say stainless steel you're probably fine, you'd be safe. But for us, for the most part, the bowl that it's going to be rising in, the container that you store your starter in, it's just safer to keep them in glass. So, and also something with the starter, depending on how long you want your bread to proof for, you can use a little bit less or more starter, because this basically just determines how fast it's going to rise, how much time it's going to take to grow. You can see we have our dough over there that it has been growing overnight. So actually with that one, we needed a bit of a longer time frame between last night and this afternoon because we usually bake our bread in the morning. So we only did a 1/3 cup of starter in that one, but we typically do half. So.
You notice this is stainless steel. I used a stainless steel measuring cup to add the starter. If it's in there for just a few moments, it's not going to make a big difference. It's more like you don't want to store it and expose it for a long time.
So then you just want to mix the starter into the water really well.
Does it matter what the temperature of the water is?
No, again, if you use warm water, it'll make your bread rise faster.
Yeah.
If you use cold water, it'll rise more slowly. We typically use water that's fairly close to lukewarm. So it's not going to damage the bread either way, it'll just affect the rising time.
So you'll have some nice looking milk here. Some almond milk.
Bread milk.
So you just carefully add that in.
And you never do the opposite. You never put the water into the flour.
Right.
You always have to put it into the water.
That's the way we were taught.
Yeah,
You guys are welcome to experiment, but
No,
this
it's
turns out
bad.
good.
That's the way. I've made other.
Yeah, I see that.
Shannon, could you give me one more half cup? Remember, I put 2.5 cups first, but we will use almost 3 cups entirely. But first, you just want to kind of see where you're at with this. And so we are going to have some volunteers today, eventually, for kneading. But also, if anyone here wants to, once I get this to a little decent texture, you can kind of feel it and kind of get an idea of what it feels
Where
like.
did
and
you
it
buy
looks like.
that mixing tool?
Amazon.
We literally ordered like a sourdough kit off of Amazon. So it came with the dough whisk, the scraper, the proofing bowl, which we'll talk a little bit about later.
So convenient.
Yeah, and we got this nice Dutch oven.
Yeah.
How much was that starting heat?
This was on sale for like $35, which Dutch ovens, they're expensive, like at least $100. So I was very thankful for that. And I think the starter kit was $15, or the dough kit. Yeah.
So yeah, as you can see, as he's stirring it in, it's pretty dry. It's obvious it needs more water. But depending on the different type of flour you use, it might be a little different as well. So I'm gonna see as you go.
You want to add it all at once, just kind of see where you're at, because it's almost kind of strange how it's like, oh, it's really dry, then you add like a little splash of water, and then it gets really, the texture changes a lot quickly.
It's just suddenly perfect.
Now, if you add too much water by mistake, does it get ruined?
So what Jonathan told us, what I remember him telling is, if you add too much water accidentally, you can add a little bit more flour, but it's just going to be kind of awkward to mix it in. It's going to be difficult, right? I'm going to add a little bit more water. But not really. We'll show you whenever we do some kneading, because you have to knead this thing 3 times. And then once the 3rd time, then it's done for the night. You cover it with a plastic bag. We'll get there. But once when you knead, you have to get your hand wet. So maybe just like try and get it less wet, just to not add more water, So, because a little bit of moisture is not going to hurt it. It'll be fine. Okay, I think this is almost where we want it.
So you want it to be firm, but still gooey.
And you'll see like little dry pieces of flour, and you just want to keep working it until you don't see any more dry flour whatsoever. Keep turning it. It could take a little bit more water, but I won't, because then if I get it to this point, then I will just get a little extra water on my hand once I'm kneading it. So we'll show you that part here in a moment. Who wants to feel it?
Does anyone want to see what it feels like with the whisk, just to get a sense of what the texture should be?
I want to.
Yeah, please.
All right.
Don't be shy.
Try to, scrape it down to get all the material to the middle. So, because there probably will be a lot that, get stuck on the edges as you're doing that.
We're going to cover it just like it is for 10 minutes. So we'll set a little timer. We'll just put it over here for now.
We were also just going to mention at this time, these are the little starters that we made for you guys. So you'll each be able to take one of these home. So this was all from, is our starter back in the fridge now? Yeah, so they're all the babies of our starter.
We
We've been
prepared
feeding them all
2
week.
weeks ago. We
Yeah.
started sectioning off in little yogurt jars. So I encourage you, when you take this home, put it in a bigger jar, add about, 4 ounces of flour.
Yeah, so the typical ratio that people go by, we honestly didn't know this until we were doing more research this week. So we've just been adding approximately equal amounts of flour and water
Just
to
been
our
eyeballing
starter.
it, kind of mixing it.
Just what looks like a good amount, we mix it in, and that's been good for us. But what they recommend is about 4 ounces starter to 4 ounces flour and 4 ounces water.
And it's that type flour there?
Yes,
Yeah.
so we feed this with this because it's less expensive for one thing, and it still works really well. It's organic, and yeah, so we use the all-purpose flour to feed that, and we save the spelt or whatever other flour you use.
And how often do you do it?
So you want to feed it at least once a week. For us, we make bread at least that often, sometimes twice a week. So we just feed it immediately after we take some out, once we're done.
Why don't I see ours right now?
Yeah, you can show them that. Let's do that. But if you're not gonna bake bread that often, then you do want to make sure that you're feeding it at least every 7 to 10 days. Or it
So
can-
it'll keep growing then, you'll have more and more of it?
well, if you keep taking from it, then you're pretty much just replenishing what was there. So, and if it gets to the point where it's too much, you can separate some off and give it to a friend. Or you can just dispose of some, or there are some neat, I saw there's some recipes online that you can use the starter directly in some neat little recipes and stuff. So
So you see, I'm just gonna add, approximately 2 of these, and should be good. And I'm just gonna add some water here as well. And another cool object lesson we learn, we try and let God teach us as we go. But this was a starter that was given to us, and it multiplies, and then we section off little portions to give out, and it's kind of like how the gospel works, And these things are living activity. You contribute, and it grows and grows, and it multiplies, and it's really encouraging.
Like feeding the fish? Or
Exactly.
feeding people with fish?
Feeding with fish. Yes.
Feeding with fish.
Multiplying the bread, the loaves.
Yes.
So you can see my texture here. I've got some pancake batter. But it's nice.
And that's it?
And that's about it.
And you just scrape up
just
your-
wanna
Back in the
scrape it off.
And
like
it'll
that.
expand in the jar a little bit, or?
So it's interesting
sure
because
will.
it actually expands a bit, but then it kind of deflates again because it's, like you said, it's a living colony in there, right? So it's actually eating the flour that you just added. But if you can see that these ones, you see all the little bubbles?
Those have grown quite a bit. We fed
Yeah.
them this morning, each one of them, a little tablespoon or so.
So, like,
mix them up.
You can tell this one looks a bit more established than that one. If you can see, this one just has bigger bubbles. It starts to look like a sponge, really, right? So once you feed it, you can leave it out on the counter for a little bit if you want to just give it some time to activate at a warmer temperature and before you stick it in the fridge. But we've pretty much just been putting ours right back in the fridge after we feed it, and it seems to do fine. So yeah, it's kind of a trial and error.
Yes, ma'am.
Dumb question. You used the term several times to proof your bread. What does that mean?
Proofing is just once you knead it and you let it sit overnight. That's what it's called when the bread is just left to rise. It's called proofing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's proving itself.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll do just the first little bit and get my hands. My hands are clean. I washed them just a minute ago. So you do want to use filtered water, just like we said. Just get your hand nice and wet there. And I'm left-handed, as you can see. You can use your right hand. But I usually go and I just dive right into the side like that. And I start folding it on top of itself like this.
So you really want to force your hand under it and then over
So
and on
sticky
top.
it is.
Yeah.
So it gets really sticky. So you just dip it.
Yeah.
Shake
That's
it.
basically what the water is for keeping your hand from sticking to the dough too much.
So we'll cover it again. You do that. I'll wash my hands.
So then this time you set 15 minutes. So you do 10 and then 15, 15. So we wanted to add a little bonus recipe in for you guys. It's on the back of your sheet as well. So this recipe is for a oil-free, plant-based butter. So for us that eat plant-based, you can buy like Earth Balance and those kind of things in the store, but to be honest, those really aren't any healthier for you than just eating dairy butter because of the processed oils. So this is an option. All it is coconut milk, yellow cornmeal, and salt. So
Very simple.
very healthy, and you don't feel as guilty slathering a whole bunch of it on your bread. We do 1.5 cups of the light coconut milk, and then 1/4 cup of water. So we do 3 tablespoons of cornmeal, and then just 1/2 teaspoon of salt.
There's a whisk.
Fork works fine, but yeah, the whisk would also work. And then you just mix that up. And then you're just gonna get this to where it's simmering, simmer it for 5 minutes. And then you'll transfer it into a blender and blend it on high for 1 to 2 minutes. And then you just pour it into some sort of little glass container. And then you just put it in the fridge to set up overnight. I just made this morning, so it might not be completely solid yet. Yeah, it still has a little ways to go, but you can see it's solidifying to where you could spread it like butter. So yeah, you guys can pass that around. Okay, so it's time for our next meeting. Okay, so then we cover it again, and there'll be one more meeting. Okay, so that was the 3rd meeting. It's covered, and then you don't touch it all night. We usually prepare the dough maybe between 5 and 7 p.m. And then I am able to bake it around 10 a.m., 9, 10 a.m.
It's usually done by 7:30, 8 at this point, like no later than that.
Sure. Yeah, once we do. Yeah, because with the timing and all the kneading and stuff. But it's nice because the actual amount of time that you're spent here doing the stuff, it's not a ton, and it's more just like waiting for the timers so you can be doing other stuff. So yeah, I was happily surprised to see that it's really not that much effort and not that much work as I thought it would be. And like I said, we've been making probably 2 loaves a week for a while now. We have just, so once we make it, it's so good. We eat it with every meal. And we've been sharing some with others too. So yeah, it's hasn't been a burden on me in any way. It's been a huge blessing to be able to do that. We're now jumping forward to the morning or the next day.
So the night before you would have done 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, and then put it on the cabinet for the night.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. All right, this is important.
Stuck to
And
the
you don't
bag
want
of
that
it,
to
you don't
happen.
want that to happen. But this is because we left it, it was a little longer. It'll be fine, but
This is the fun part, by the way.
it's nicer if it's not all stuck to the bag. So yeah, so you want it to, increase significantly in size. It should double at least, or triple.
All right, so you take your little strainer like this, and then you want to have a nice light dusting like this. We're gonna. Okay.
So we use this spatula type instrument to just help as you tip it out. You'll see just before you dump it out. So yeah, you'll see it's increased in size quite a bit. You'll see all the bubbles. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
And then the top should be kind of domed and fairly smooth.
But
If it's if it's starting to get like bubbly and bumpy, that's when you know like you need to bake your bread now because it's
So
it's
this is almost like too long. It'll be fine. It did start, by the way, like way down here, so it's risen like 2 or 3 times more than what. Yeah. Okay. So
this is all
it just
gonna
falls out. Yeah. So everyone can see that nice gooey cheese. We don't eat cheese here, but we can admire how beautiful it is.
So he's done this several times, so he's got the hang of it. But it can be helpful to do with a partner the first time. Have one person holding it while the other one scrapes it out of there. There you go.
Yeah. Here's your flour, we just couldn't see.
We only have one big glass jar, so like while I'm doing this, she's washing it real quick because we need something. So this is called cutting in. This is your bread scraper, and so you can sprinkle some a little bit more on top. I'm just gonna deal with this because it's a monster. So I'm gonna use my other hand here a little bit to kind of control it.
If you find it is very sticky, you can sprinkle a bit more flour on top as well. While he's doing that, I'm going to preheat the oven. We set it to 500, and then we're going to set the timer for 15 minutes.
Looks like I'm pretty low on flour. I probably should have put some on top because it's pretty sticky here.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
why don't we do that real quick?
And while he's working on that, I oil the bowl. So there's no oil used in the bread recipe itself, but we do use a little bit of oil just to coat this bowl so that it won't stick. So you don't need much.
Is that olive oil?
We have
It's a high temp point.
organic safflower oil.
Okay.
So yeah, you want to use one that has a
High smoke.
high smoke point. And then just use your hand, and you just want to make sure this is really thoroughly oiled on every spot, because we've had it happen a couple times where I've missed, like one little section, and then as we're pouring it out, it sticks to it and pulls a piece of it off. So you don't need a lot of oil, but you want to make sure it's thoroughly coated.
I should have put more flour down because you see you don't want that to happen. So I'm just gonna bring this guy over here. But you do want to shape it into a nice, like a ball kind of. Typically, like you wouldn't even flip it so many times. It would just be, a couple turns and a couple pulls and.
And this may be because we've left this one
Yeah,
a little
that's what
longer
it seems
too.
like.
It's a bit more airy and sticky. So he's just gonna plop that right into there.
It'll usually be a little bit more firm, so
Yeah.
this is more gooey than typically you would expect.
But it's fine. And then you get another plastic bag. So we were storing up tons of these grocery bags just in like a bag in our laundry room, and thought we were never going to be able to use them for anything, but now we're running out. We're almost out because we use them so much for the bread. But they work really well, so just cover that again. And once that 15-minute timer goes off, we're going to put the baking vessel into the oven to actually preheat the vessel itself before putting the bread into it. So that's just what you'll do typically in the morning. And yeah, if your schedule is so that you can only prep the bread in the evening and also bake it in the evening, evenings are pretty much your only free time, you can keep your bread, this one, as it's proofing in the fridge, and it'll rise much slower. And yeah, it's just kind of a trial and error to see how long you can go with that. But we did do that one time where I wasn't able to bake it until like 5 p.m. the next day. So we kept it in the fridge overnight, and then maybe around 12 p.m. the next day, I took it out of the fridge and let it rise on the counter for a few hours. and it was good to go by 5. So.
For a diabetic, this bread would be better for them than regular white bread because of the glycemic index.
Oh, for sure.
Anything would be better than white bread.
Yeah, well, exactly. But this,
Yeah.
Yes, it would be a lot better. And no one's gonna dislike that bread. A lot of people kind of get in the habit of eating that white. Our friend Jonathan, he says that's not real bread, that's cake. So, it's true. So.
Getting rid of white flour in my diet cured my kidney disease, just for
Awesome.
your information.
Thank you.
wow.
Thank you for
For
sharing.
sure. So this is about to go off, and then we're gonna take the lid off of here and just put this in the oven for 10 minutes. So we found that that's all the time necessary to get it nice and hot. You can just put it in and leave it in for the full 25 minutes. And that's actually what Jonathan does, and that works well for him. But with, everyone has a different oven, different vessel. For ours, we found that if we put this in for the full 25 minutes, the bottom of the bread got really black. So we're like, okay, it was a little too hot. So yeah, so we just split up that time. So we'll put this in. Yeah, so again, you just kind of have to experiment with your own home, your own tools, and see what works well for you. I'll just set this down.
And we are letting this rise. This is the one that we stretched out. I did want to just mention again, like with the cutting board situation, it was really, you see how loose it was just kind of falling over the place. I think it did overproof a little bit, so typically if you bake it within those like 12, 14-hour window, you'll be able to get it. It won't be so, I guess, everywhere. You should be able to get a nice, fairly firm ball, and then you can usually just pop it up into that. So hopefully it'll turn out fine. We had this happen one other time, and it turned out okay.
And so the reason why we did 15 and 10 is you want about 25 minutes for this to rise again before we put it in the oven. All right, everyone, well, the oven's ready, our vessel's ready, so we're going to
This is
show
an
you
important step.
very important step. So it's going to be very hot.
She would love that.
Oh, for yourself.
I want to show you all real quick. We have this. This is like corn. It's like corn grits, fine corn grits. We sprinkle on the bottom. It gives it a nice little design there, and it also kind of protects it. So just put a nice layer on the bottom. You sprinkle it in. And,
I found that also helps, like putting a good layer on the bottom keeps the bottom from getting as dark. It kind of provides a little layer there, I guess.
Is that the same stuff
I'll
you
put a
made
little
the
more on
butter
the
with?
side. No, so that was cornmeal. This is fine corn grits,
Gotcha.
so it's a bit bigger.
And you haven't greased that pan with anything?
we have not. No, you don't need any kind of grease in this one. 'Cause-
All right, so everyone is ready to go in there.
All right.
You can see it's grown quite a bit.
Everyone, be careful to not touch the sides of the pan.
So you want to pour it in very gently.
Alright.
You don't want to plop it in there because it can deflate the whole loaf. So you cover it and put it in. So you put it to 490, put your bread in, and then you're going to set the timer for half an hour.
Right.
You're gonna take it, lower it to 450 and bake for another, 5 minutes?
5 minutes, yes.
So this is our last step, everyone. We're going to take the lid off.
Ooh,
Okay.
nice, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yes. So then you just do about 5 to 10 more minutes, depending on how the crust looks. If you feel like it could get a bit darker, you could do 10 minutes. We find for us 5 is always fine, but again, every oven's different.
All right, we have a recipe request. Recipe for Goshka. Is Goshka, she's a soup maker?
The basic thing is you make a nice potato soup the way you would like it.
Okay.
And once the potato soup is ready, you have to have the pickles in brine, not the one in vinegar. They have to be the one like sauerkraut that they got soured in with salt. And then when the potato soup is ready, yes, then you chop up the pickles the way you want it. And then you keep tasting. If you want more sour, you add some more juice. If you want whatever. I use quite a lot in this because I like it on the sour side. In Poland, we had a big blob of sour cream on the end. But I use soya milk, like 1.5 cup to make it white. And if you have it, it's nice to put dill on top of it on the end.
Okay, the baby is being born. Let's watch.
Yeah, we used
Let's see it. See how it turned out.
Did you like it?
yeah, it was more.
My wife said to do some with
We thought
Yeah.